Welcome to the Advisor Dads podcast, where we explore the decisions that shape our everyday lives and how to navigate them with confidence. Join us as we share insights, strategies, and real life experiences to help you build a plan for the ups and downs of life's roller coaster. David Rath is managing partner at Continuum Wealth Advisors. Ben Tuscai is the Director of Financial Planning at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments or Continuum Wealth Advisors. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Continuum Wealth Advisors or Sunpoint Investments. Now on to the show.
Dave, episode 1, we're kicking it off. 2 dads. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes. And just so those who are unaware, we are 2 financial advisors, also 2 fathers. And so the aim of what we're doing here is to give people some practical advice on the ideas of being a father, the ideas around your money, and making it so that it's not very dry. And maybe I'll throw in a dad joke or 2 in there.
We will have plenty of dad jokes throughout our series here. I feel like it's just appropriate that you start. Do you have a favorite dad joke? I feel like every dad's got their favorite dad joke.
I don't know if I have a favorite dad joke, but I am the person in my friend group who loves puns more than anything, especially when I'm watching sporting events. The worse, the better, it's in my opinion. And I don't like to go the obvious route. I like to look at, like, how can I tie something into the more obscure, and the longer it takes somebody to figure out that I'm making a pun, the better it is. I'll give you an example. There was a hockey game. The guy's last name was Schuster, and he got a penalty, so he got put in the box. And so I texted my friends who were watching the game at the same time. I'm like, oh, look, Schuster just got booked. And so it took them a minute to figure out that, Simon & Schuster is a book publisher. And so to me, that is the ideal. That is the ideal pun, where it takes them a second to figure it out. And then once they do, they yell at me for making a terrible joke, but I love it.
So you have you got to go beyond the basic level with yours. Okay. You're thinking that's further ahead than me.
Yeah. And another one, there's a soccer player. His last name is Bueno. And obviously Bueno in Spanish is good. So cross-lingual puns are always great. Like they're a real crowd pleaser, at least in my mind.
Well, all we're trying to do is please the crowd. That's what we're trying to do at all times, especially as advisors, and take care of our clients. Episode 1 focused on kicking off retirement, which is one of the most challenging. I mean, you see this, definitely more than I do. Retirement sometimes is this abstract conversation, especially for anybody that's under the age of 40 or even 50. It feels like it's just so far away and hard to explain and touch. So today we're going to talk through some of those factors of how do you determine when's the right time, and what are the conversations that you're not having or most people are not thinking about, which is really where I want to spend most of our time today, because we can talk about the numbers all we want, but it's those other areas that are really important. So as we think through some of this, and you, again, as I mentioned before, you see this more than I do. What do you think most people are thinking about? Obviously we'll go to what are they not thinking about shortly here, but what do you think they are thinking about in these conversations?
The easiest place to start is you have a pile of money and you have a projected amount of years that you're going to live, and doing the simple math of how long is this money going to last me? Am I going to survive off of this money that I've accumulated? That's the easy stuff, in my opinion, because everything can go on a spreadsheet and we can crunch the numbers and assume different things and run all these fancy charts and show you what you're projected at. And honestly, it's kind of window dressing for the true aspect of stepping away from a job that you have worked your entire life at and a career that you've developed, and what is the identity that people have associated with who they are and what they're doing for their occupation. Or if we get into the standpoint of we go from accumulating to spending, that's another shift mentally that people have to make. What is your purpose in life? All of those things from an emotional standpoint are going to be, I think, just as important, if not more important than the financial aspect. Because as financial advisors, people who hire us, we're doing that legwork for them, right? We're making sure that they have enough money to survive. Sometimes you need to be more of a therapist or a psychologist to help people through some of the other issues.
Yeah, the one that's fascinating that I think is so behavioral and psychology driven is that you go from accumulating to spending. And it sounds easy, but from your experience, I'd imagine it's not easy to like flip that switch. It's really not even really a switch. It's probably a dial that you're having to adjust over time.
And there are certain things that we have to do as advisors to help people with that process. Because if you have, let's say, $1 million accumulated in your life, that is now your high water mark
Yep.
for your portfolio. And then once you start to draw on it, the scarcity mindset starts to creep in. And what you'll run into is people underspending in retirement. They've saved all this money, they've been diligent over their working careers, and now they enter into a period of time where they should be enjoying the fruits of their labor, and they end up underspending because they're worried that they're going to run out of money. And so things that you might do or that we might do as advisors to help combat that is to maybe transform some of their savings from variable, meaning tied to the stock and the bond market, to more of a structure and a distribution strategy, whether we're using an annuity, whether we're using a bond ladder or something that is going to give them regular income. So it still feels like they're getting a paycheck. That type of stuff can help ease that transition.
Yeah, I think the paycheck replacement is where we see the most success. If you have something coming in and then we start the conversation of like, okay, we're replicating the paycheck, but we don't need to replicate the savings and investing component. So if, later in your peak earnings years, you were saving, investing 20%, well, that's 20% that you don't need. And then obviously we can go down some of the math behind it too of like, okay, well, we're not paying payroll taxes. The federal income tax rate has gone down for you. Like you actually need even less than what you think. But if we create this structure in place, and I'd say that it's the process and the structure to help ease somebody from immediately being retired to 5 years from now saying, okay, because the reality is what you don't want is $5 million and you're spending $40,000 a year. It's like, okay, you're either going to spend it or you're going to give it away.
Yeah.
Those are the only two categories. And not spending early in retirement there are negatives. I mean, I'm sure you see it very often.
Yeah, those early years of your retirement, those are going to hopefully be the most enjoyable because you are young enough, you're healthy enough to be able to travel, to be able to enjoy that money that you've accumulated. Whereas quality of life and things that you're spending your money on later on in retirement might be more associated with healthcare costs or things like that. So you want to make sure that you are enjoying that hard work that you've done, that you've worked in your entire life for. You want to make sure that you're enjoying that. And the aspect of creating that structured plan of spending is really important. I always like to frame it to people as, do you want to bounce the check to the undertaker? That's the ideal financial plan for some people. If you tell me how long you're going to live and we nail all the other assumptions, we'll make sure that that check to the undertaker gets bounced. Or do you want to leave a large sum of money to a charity or your heirs? And usually people fall somewhere in the middle, right? They want to have a comfortable retirement and maybe leave a little bit behind.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I definitely want to go to the legacy aspect in a second, but something you mentioned when I asked you the first question was around purpose. So sure, we can get the math right. We can get the numbers set up. We can replicate the paycheck for you. But there's been this shift that we've seen over the past, I don't know, let's call it 5 years, maybe even 10 years, where the traditional retirement has kind of dissipated, where it used to be, hey, I'm retiring. I'm going to play golf. I'm going to go to Florida for 3 months of the year, what have you. But now you hear more of, well, I'm going to work part-time, or there's this charity that like, sure, I give to, but I would really like to commit more of my time, or I want to be writing. I've thought about writing this book. How do you go about the conversation of deriving purpose when you don't have the daily routine or the social construct of work anymore?
It really gets down to who they are as individuals. And I'm actually going through this right now with my own father. He's scheduled to retire at the end of this year, and it's a challenge for him. He probably won't listen to this episode. So I don't even know if he knows what a podcast is, but he's worked in banking his entire life. He's 66 years old now, and it is going to be somebody that is going to have a tough time when he's no longer a banker, right? His like his like username on his like profiles is like banker, and then the year that he started banking. So that's a tough transition for somebody like him. And I'm actually reading Christine Benz put out a book called How to Retire. And it's great because it touches on not only the monetary aspects of things, but also the emotional and the mental things. And in there, one of the pieces of advice, and took a picture of this, highlighted, sent it to him, and it said, if you are considering consulting work after you step away from your career, take at least a year off. Say no for one whole year, because you don't want to go right into being on boards and being in a consulting role, because then there's no time off, and you're not
Right.
really taking a step back to understand what is it that you truly want to do. And there's basically no off switch for you, even after your last day at your job.
Well, it's interesting too, because the year gives you enough time to find maybe some passion that just hasn't been able to be there for the past 40 years because of the responsibility, and you have a demanding profession. And that time frame allows you to step away, and I think maybe even find your identity, especially as you talk about your dad here, when it's your username for things, like, it almost did become his identity as a banker, whereas I think that there's pros and cons to all this stuff, but it's fascinating as you think of, how do I replicate some of these social situations, but I don't wanna commit to just, like, I'm gonna go to the golf course every day and hang out with the it's like, alright, is that what you wanna be doing? And that's okay if the answer is yes. But I think that year is really going to allow you to say, I said yes to that. And 2 months in, I was like, this is the worst. I don't
Yeah.
want to do this. Like, golfing's fun, but I'd love to work part time, maybe golf once or twice a week, or I'd love to be more involved with my community or my grandchildren, whatever it is that you're doing. But that year is really purposeful. It's really fascinating.
And I think golf maybe gets a bad rap because it's easy to pick on, like, that's the activity of choice for
Sure.
people that want to retire. But even if it's golf, like, if your passion is golf and you retire and it's a lot less of a passive enjoyment of being on the golf course, that leisure aspect, maybe you volunteered to coach the high school golf team,
Yeah.
or you cut the lawn on the golf course and you meet some other members, and like that is this social interaction. Because I was reading also in that book about males, especially, their social life is tied a lot to their job. So when you take that away from them, they're lost and they don't know what to do. And so having some level of social engagement, whether it is through a golf or a country club, allows them to continue that social interaction. I can't remember where I heard it, but they say that the number one killer for older people is retirement. And part of that is because they've lost that purpose, as you said. They've lost that motivation to continue being like engaged in their life. And so if you are just sitting on a beach and listening to Jimmy Buffett, drinking pina coladas, that's going to get really old really quick. So you need to figure out what it is that you want to do. And it can be anything. It can literally be anything as long as you are applying yourself to it.
I think there's I don't know the exact data point, but I've talked to my mother-in-law and my mom about it. If the distance that you live away from your grandkids has a lot to do with how long you live. And that ability to connect with not only the one generation, obviously, that they helped raise, but the next generation after them. If you have two, young boys, it's like, if your dad's coming over to hang out with your boys, like, Yeah, he's going to be tired when he leaves your house. It's the
Mhm.
same thing with my mom and my mother-in-law. It's like that helps keep you young, keep the body moving. And there's that purpose. And maybe that purpose isn't always, the reason that he's coming to spend time with his grandkids. But I think it's those things that we need to think about and the conversations that you need to be having as an advisor with clients about, hey, let's before we actually say we're done and we're going to retire, let's have some of these conversations and figure out where we're going to derive purpose from. So that's it's really interesting. And obviously then when you're living it with your own parents, it hits home. But if we pivot this then to where everybody assumes that we love to have this conversation is the investment side of things. We talked about replicating the paycheck. We talked about, hey, the social construct and deriving purpose. How does then the portfolio change other than just maybe a structured product or some laddered bonds? How are you thinking about meeting retirement needs with, a nest egg?
And there's an emotional aspect to this as well, because this the fear that every single person has when they step away from their job is the market crashing, right? Imagine being a retiree in 2008 when the S&P 500 was down over 50%. I looked it up before this today, and a balanced fund, so your traditional 60/40, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, that was down 35%. Could you imagine the level of fear that was present in those people who were just holding on for dear life? Like, yes, it came back, and then now we're at all-time highs and everything's all great in the market and people's portfolios, but there's always that aspect of, well, what if it doesn't? Because we can always look at prior history and say, well, just hold on to it through the bottom and you'll be rewarded for holding on. In real time, there is nothing like that fear of watching your portfolio disintegrate. So having a structured investment strategy, and this is what we do for our clients, is making sure that they have a smooth or as smooth of a ride as possible into their retirement. And some of that is taking risk off the table, front loading those distributions into something like a money market fund or a bond that's going to mature in the next year or two. And so knowing that those people have the money that they need to live off of that is not going to really go up or down in value. It's just going to be there as that bedrock, allows that longer term portfolio to continue to grow, to fight inflation, all of the stuff that goes into it. So it's a combination of everything. And I will say that there's no perfect solution here, right? Because there's always a trade off between risk and return. And I'm going to steal from somebody that I respect greatly, where you can't get rid of risk. You can only change its form. And the first law of physics, or whatever law of physics that is, like you can't create or destroy energy or matter. You can only change its form. So same thing with risk. When people say, I'm just going to de-risk my portfolio at the beginning of retirement, I'll come back to them and say, you're just accepting a different form of risk, which is that your portfolio is not going to grow enough for you. It's a little easier for them to accept that because it's more abstract. It's not going to be right in their face and watching their portfolio decline. Inflation is going to be a silent killer. So that type of stuff is where you really have to have those conversations of, what are you trying to do? How can we get there? And how do we make this into a strategy that you are going to stick to through thick and thin? And that's really where the financial advisor or the investment manager, we really have to sometimes lean into the biases that people have to make sure that they stick around for the entirety of their retirement.
Yeah, and how does that look? So, like for you guys, for investment wise, and then we're gonna hop on to our last segment and wrap. But how does that work? Is that like the barbell approach? And what that really just means is like on one end we're gonna put maybe 3 or 4 years in cash, 3 years of expenses in cash. This way, if we see an OE, you're not even gonna touch the risky assets per se for at least 3 years. This gives you 3 years of buy time, or maybe there's 5 years. Like, how does it work for you guys that you de-risk? I understand it's a different risk transformation of risk, but how do you guys approach that and how do you do it?
There are a few ways of approaching it. We do a buckets of money approach where we have this very short-term bucket that is about 12 months in cash that's going to be money market readily available for distributions. And then we have the intermediate bucket, which is going to be in high grade corporate treasuries, corporate bonds or treasuries, like that type of investment. So as those bonds mature, flows down into the lower bucket. And then on the third bucket, it's going to be your long-term growth portfolio. So that is one way of approaching that situation. There are other advisors who recommend like a guardrails approach and only take money out at a certain level if the market is between these levels. And if the market drops by 20%, you curb your spending. There is no right answer because we don't know what the future is going to hold. We like the idea of the buckets of money because it's visual. People understand that when their lower bucket is getting depleted, we can fill it with the higher buckets and it represents this cascading effect. And so depending on the situation, depending on the person or the advisor, you can approach the problem from a variety of angles, but I think any angle is better than the ostrich approach, which stick your head in the sand and hopefully it works out, right? You want to be fully aware of what the experience is like and it's going to be like moving forward.
Yeah, spot on. Some plan is better than no plan, and having somebody to, I mean, obviously we're both super biased as advisors, but that is one of the inherent benefits that somebody is going to be able to continue to talk you through the math. And hey, if you are really, really uncomfortable versus oh, let's sell it and go to cash, there's a whole host of opportunities there that, okay, we can take maybe more stocks off the table or more growth assets off the table. We can refill some of those other buckets and have that conversation and create, the visual effect of this is obviously really important too. All right, we're going to hit our segment here. Advice, bad advice, or dad advice, which really is Dave and I giving you a scenario that we either have seen in our practice or seen out social media wise that's been pretty prevalent. We're obviously going to stick to this retirement conversation here today. So let me lay out this scenario. This is definitely one that I've seen within the practice before, trying to figure out when is the right time to retire. And when you have to face the unexpected retirement due to a caregiver situation, whether that's maybe your kid/grandkid needs care, or it's an elderly parent that needs care that's putting you in this unfortunate position of you're going to need more care than just popping over to mom or dad's a couple hours a day at night after work. You're going to have to step away from work early. How do we think through that? What is the advice? What's the bad advice? And then where do we fit kind of maybe somewhere in between?
If I approach this from a purely monetary perspective, you can look at things like hours of time being spent in certain things and what your retirement picture looks like on a spreadsheet. And that's going to be, I guess, one aspect of it because you don't want to shortchange yourself when you're approaching the situation, but that is completely neglecting the idea of helping your kin. So you don't want just money to play into it, but that's going to be a factor. Let's say that somebody is 55 years old and they have either a parent who's entering into a situation where they need assisted living, or their children just had their first grandkids and they need help because childcare costs are, as you know, Ben, they're astronomical. So how do you approach that? And I would kind of, I don't know which end of the spectrum this fits on, but you always want to make sure that you are set, like be selfish a little bit about your situation, because I get into this conversation a little bit when people ask about funding their kids' college and should they do it from their own pockets or should they take out loans? And there's never a loan that you can take out for retirement. You can always take out loans to pay for college, to pay for childcare, that type of stuff like is available, but nobody's going to give you a loan just to say like meet my living expenses in retirement. So that would be, I guess, one way to approach it. But then again, it's completely neglecting the emotional aspect of it, where this is your father and your mother or your grandkids that need to be taken care of. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I think my advice is somewhere probably closer to the selfish aspect because unfortunately, if you're not at least somewhat selfish in this situation and take care of yourself, you're really going to have somebody take care of you in the next 10 or 15 years. So if you're not secure and there is no plan in place, that's really my advice is we need to sit down and figure out how are you going to make this work and for what amount of time are we anticipating this? Because if it's an elder parent, hey, what are some of the options that we could still work and pay for or help share in the cost if there's siblings versus if it's a child, like, hey, I know we both know childcare is, you can't say anymore. It's another mortgage. It's like 2.5 mortgages now today. So like, okay, maybe there's a way to share in the cost and paying for that tuition for their kids to go to a childcare facility. So I think that there's a middle ground. So my advice is be a little bit selfish. I think the bad advice here is to go flip it the other way and just be like, hey, I have to do what I have to do and support them. And then you turn 65 and you're like, oh my God, I have to work full time for another 6 years because I did that decision back then and I didn't even think about it. Like that's the bad advice of just kind of that ostrich, comment that you had earlier of like, put your head in the sand. The dad advice for me is somewhere in the middle of, okay, open up the lines of communication. You have an elder parent, you're going to have, that's a tough situation to navigate, but I would be trying to figure out a way for paying for or splitting the cost or working part-time. Like there's got to be somewhere in the middle where you could still generate income for yourself and continue to live your life, but be able to support your family. And I think that could definitely be done on the younger generation side of like, hey, why don't we share the cost? We'll pick up the tab on 30 or 40 or 50% of daycare to make sure that, we're doing our part here too.
And it's also an advertisement for starting the planning early
Yeah.
for your grandkids or for your elderly parents. Like rewind 15 years, and if your elderly parents had gone through the process of planning for their care, it wouldn't be so much of a burden because there was already a plan in place for it. So there's never a better time than the present. Although there's a Chinese proverb that says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. I'll put a dad spin on that and say like, no, the next best time was the day after. Like if we're
Yeah.
being honest, right?
It's 19
Like
years and 364 days ago, actually.
yeah, I get the gist of, but
Yeah.
the next best day is the day after.
Right.
So start today, get plans in place because you never want to be reacting in the moment. And that's how mistakes get made. That's how financial plans get blown up.
Yeah. Being reactive for this stuff is usually a losing battle. And there's no worse feeling than you back against the wall and like, hey, we just got to fight our way out of this somehow versus, hey, we've been proactive. We took the appropriate risk. This happened that we weren't thinking about. That's okay. We were erring on the side of caution over here anyway. It's like, yeah, those things are really important. But all right, Dave, that's a wrap. Episode 1 in the books. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you out on podcast land and YouTube.
It can only get better from here.